I'm a columnist for the international media. I'm a playwright and a librettist with the Welsh National Opera. I'm told by the press that I'm the first South Asian woman to have written an international opera. How that relates to the short story, I don't know. Or on the other hand, I could show you that it all brings to, it comes to bear on how you write the short story.
Absolutely fabulous stuff, Shreya. Thank you very much. And Giselle, over to you. Giselle, you might be on mute if you're out there. There you go.
Great. Hi there, everyone. I'm a short story writer so far, although I'm working on a sort of hybrid book at the moment, which is a longer book. Like Dan, I really love the short story form. I am an editor for Reckoning magazine, which is an American magazine for environmental justice. So if you've got any short stories, poems, or non-fiction to send there, look it up. It's called Reckoning. And I'm also currently working with the Word Factory. I was chosen as a Word Factory apprentice, I think 2019-20, and I've sort of stayed on helping them do events and write reviews and articles, which I'm really enjoying. Thank you.
Thank you, Giselle. Brilliant stuff, brilliant stuff. So I'm going to throw this first question out to everybody. I think kind of a relatively quick starter, I suppose. What was it that first attracted you to writing short fiction? That's not something that everybody necessarily gets into or reads in their kind of formative years. Shreya, would you mind kicking us off with what got you interested in the form?
Yeah, I think I grew up with short stories. I think it's very much an Indian form as well. So I grew up reading them in crowded buses and between classes. The beauty of the short story is how crisp it is, but it brings you entire worlds, and it's in bite-sized chunks. But having said that, there's this kind of precision engineering about it, a crafting that you don't find in the longer form sometimes, and that really attracted me. I think that's what I bring to pretty much everything I write. As a columnist, because you have a word limit, as a writer of songs and poetry, that's what attracted me to writing it. But bizarrely, I came to short stories after a first early foray, very, very late, about 6-7 years ago. But I have had so much fun with it. I'd recommend it to anyone.
Brilliant stuff. Thank you very much, Shreya. Giselle, any thoughts on that one? What got you started?
Yes. Well, I always wanted to write, but I didn't quite know how to do it. And then during the financial crash, I read a couple of books, which I'll mention later, which are really good about getting you started. And up to then, I'd been writing terrible poetry, and so I just decided to try short stories instead. And it took me a while to learn the form. I mean, some of my favorites are my old stories that I just didn't know how to end them and things like that. And I'm very fond of them now. So and I just carried on writing every day for 5 days a week, and eventually I sort of learnt the form. Yeah, and now I absolutely love short stories. Yeah.
Brilliant stuff. Thank you very much, Giselle. I appreciate that. Dan, over to you.
Yeah, mine was actually quite a sort of practical introduction, because I decided to do a creative writing course with the OU, and it was my first short story that I wrote was for that course, so it was kind of a requirement of the course. But in doing that, I kind of fell for the form quite hard in terms of it is that what Shreya mentioned about that precision that it requires. There's something. It's almost like a puzzle, a short story. When you're constructing it, you're trying to figure out how it works and which bits go where, and where to stop with it as well. The ending is always quite important, and just figuring out that puzzle of it kind of really interested me. And it's kind of unique as a literary form, I think, in that it does things that no other literary form can do. And there's something about that, something about its brevity, something about the nature of ending, and the way that the short story has to kind of constantly almost be ending at all points within it, that really kind of engages me. And and although you can figure out some basics of the form, the thing that keeps me coming back to it is the fact that you've really got to figure out what to do for the particular story you're writing. So each time you start one, you've got to learn a whole new thing to do with that story. Although you've got all the backlog of all the kind of things that you've learned so far from the stories that you've written before, the story you're writing requires something new of you, and that's always really exciting, really sort of challenging as a writer.
Brilliant stuff. Thank you very much, everybody. Lots of impassioned thoughts there. That's a form I think everyone really cares about immensely. I'm going to get right to the crux of it, 'cause I'm sure many of the attendees here are kind of, well, how do I go about it? How do I start? What's kind of, you know, maybe how do I keep improving my short stories? So I'm going to ask for your best advice for anyone looking to write short stories or develop their short stories. I put you on the spot there, I'm afraid. Giselle, would you mind kicking us off there? Any thoughts on that one?
Sure. I can only share what worked for me, and I think it's worked for a lot of people. But obviously, some people write in a different way or learn a different way. So for me, the two crucial books, one's called by Dorothea Brand, called Becoming a Writer, and it's crucial because it's not about you know, the usual things about how to write, like characterization and setting. It's actually about why people can't start to write. And there's an important page in that book that says if you do a few little exercises, and it says if you can't do this consistently, just give up writing and do something else. And that's what got me writing. I thought I have to do it now. So I absolutely love that book. I recommend it to anyone. And it's also Hilary Mantel recommends that one as well. She said just read it and do everything the book says you should do. The other is Natalie Goldberg, Writing Down the Bones. And it's sort of like all about free writing, and that's what made me start able to write, because up till then I didn't quite know how to do it, and but for me I have to cut my head off, which is what I say, cut your head off. You write without your head and then you edit later with your head, but when you're coming up with ideas, you don't want to be thinking. So that book just helps you to stop thinking and just play, and I think play is crucial too, to just have fun, and eventually if you just do it for long enough, something will happen and you'll be able to write a good short story. Thank you.
That's fabulous. Thank you, Giselle. Dan, can I throw that one over to you?
Yeah, I think for me, one of the key things would be just to read a lot of short stories, see what other writers are doing and how they're doing it. I read a lot of writers, even now, and kind of, you know, the first read through, I'm kind of in awe of what they've done. How have they managed to do that? And, you know, kind of then you have to reread, look a bit closer, because that teaches you an awful lot, I think, in terms of what you can do with the form. And I think if you're serious about writing in any kind of literary form or genre, you need to be reading the stuff that's being written, or that, you know, and the really classic stuff, the great stuff that's out there, to kind of sort of find your feet with it. And then I think Giselle's absolutely right. Then play around with stuff, you know, kind of take what you've picked up from the things that you've been reading, take the things that you love about the things that you're reading, but then do your thing with them, you know, kind of play around with stuff, play around with structure, play around with character. And I would say the absolutely key thing, and the thing that stopped me writing for a long time, was feeling like you need to have it perfect straight away. Kind of letting go of that idea that your first draft is going to be brilliant, because if you're anything like me as a writer, your first draft is generally pretty bad, and kind of you need to find the thing that it's doing well and kind of draw that out and figure stuff out. And the finished piece is always, for me anyway, far removed from the initial thing when I'm writing and sort of playing around with stuff. I kind of, the first draft is very much figuring out what the story is going to be and what it's trying to do, and then I do subsequent lots of drafting to kind of make it that thing to be the best, the kind of best story that it's trying to be over the course of the redrafting. So yeah, don't put pressure on yourself to be perfect to start with. Yeah, my first drafts are still pretty bad, and I kind of, yeah, it takes a lot of work to get a story kind of where I want it to be.
Yeah, absolutely. I think sometimes people compare their first drafts to kind of finished stories, and it's just not a fair process at all, is it, ultimately? Shreya, did you have any further thoughts there? Throw that one to you.
Yes, I was just going to say, I mean, the reading is very important, and the playing with it, the enjoying it, absolutely. But to me, the structuring and the editing is equally important in a short story. I mentioned precision engineering, and Dan mentioned the puzzle. So it's really important to sort of stack it all up to get that balance just right, so that when it falls into place at the end, like an avalanche perhaps on the reader. It gives you a real jolt. That ending, that's so crucial. You can only get if you have a bit of a structure in mind already. And then of course the editing, the polishing, the polishing, the polishing. Like everyone said, nobody gets there right at the start. And with the short story, the polishing is so important to get it into that beautiful, crisp, crafted state at the end.
Fabulous stuff. Thank you very much, everyone. Really appreciate that. Giselle.
Yes, no, I think yeah, it's really interesting what Shreya's saying, because I'd say like Dan, I actually most of my writing is actually editing after the initial sort of wild spree at the beginning. But I suppose I just wanted to quickly add, just as because I think it's useful, is there's lots of sort of points in between your draft, but also that some people, I think, like Shreya said, is really helpful. You know, if you have a structure in mind, that can help. But some people, like the way I write is I find the structure as I'm going, so just write and the story sort of comes out as I'm going. So also, just to add to what Dan said, don't worry if you even don't know what on earth the story is about yourself, because it sort of eventually comes out. And George Saunders, one of my favorite short story writers, has written a brilliant essay about this. I can't remember the name, but you could, if you Google it, you should be able to find it. Thank you.
Thank you, Giselle. Dan, I'm going to pass that one back to you as well. See your hand up there.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it kind of ties in with both what Giselle and Shreya are saying, actually, in terms of talking about that structure. One thing I've found with the studying I've been doing for my research, I've been looking at pre-closure in the short story, which is this idea that the short story has stages of closure within it, where the story could end. It would perhaps be less satisfying as a story, but it could end at various moments prior to the actual final moment. And I found that really helpful in thinking about the ending, because, as Shreya said, the ending is absolutely key. You want that ending to kind of hit the reader and have a real kind of impact. And the key way of doing that is that the ending is kind of fed in throughout the story. Kind of closure is happening almost constantly within the short form, I found. And the best stories are doing that with a real sort of control. So that structure that Shreya is talking about is in part tied into, as she said, it's definitely tied into that ending, and figuring that out is yeah, I would agree, is absolutely key to it.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Dan. Shreya, I'm going to pass that one back to you as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, when you're writing the short story and you need a sort of intense focus, you're looking at the minute details. They're so important in the short story, even in the structuring, like Dan said, the little clues that lead up to the end. You've got to have all that planned out. After that, you play with it, absolutely. The other thing I wanted to say, once you've written the short story, and I know, Alex, you'll come to it eventually, but I thought it's a fairly important point as well. When you've written that short story with your intense focus, you then sort of draw back and have a wider focus when it comes to pitching, when you're sending it out into the world. Because the world, I mean, there's so many accomplished short story writers all over the world. So much of the world loves the short story. You should never narrow your focus to just maybe where you are, your country, your region. Brilliant place to start with, but then always get international, be international about it. That's
fabulous. Thank you very much, Shreya. Well, let's segue onto that then, shall we? It seems a nice point to move on to a bit about the kind of the world of publication. And so obviously you've all been very widely published as short story authors. Any tips on that sort of process, how you got started, how you kind of can try and make the most of those opportunities out there to get your work to an audience? Dan, would you mind kicking us off there?
Yeah, I think one of the key bits of advice I would give is something that I made a mistake with some of this at points, I think, is just be sure that you've got the stories where they need to be before you start sending them out. Where I've had so I think particularly when I was first starting to write short fiction, I was so eager to get stuff out, and it's right, you want to be eager to get stuff out, you want to get the writing out there once it's ready, that I think I've maybe just jumped a little too early with it in the cases of some stories. So I'd say just make sure that you've got the work to where it needs to be before you start sending out. But once you've done that, and you've got something you're confident about and you feel is, this is working, this is good, I think researching where you send it to, because you can spend a lot of time sending a story to a market or a journal or whatever that probably won't ever accept it, and it's no reflection on the story, it's just it's not a good fit. So research where you're sending your stuff to. Read the journals that are out there, because there's some great journals sort of publishing lots of short fiction at the moment. And then find the one that you think fits with the particular type of stories that you're writing, the things that you're doing, and sort of and send them out there. And I think the other thing is, just don't be discouraged when you get rejections. Everybody gets them. I still get them. I'm sure the other panelists do as well. That kind of I got a couple just the other day. It's just a case of it just doesn't fit where you've sent it. Have a look at it. If you think it's still, if you think it needs some further work, do that. But if you think it's fine, send it out again. On that note, and I'll just finish with this, that my most successful, what I would consider to be my most successful short story in terms of where it was published, was also my most rejected short story. So the one that I think has, kind of gave me a massive kind of leap up in terms of what I was doing in terms of publishing stuff. That was rejected so many times, it's ridiculous. So it's just a case of finding the right spot for your work, I think.
Fabulous. Shreya, can I throw that to you? I saw a couple of sage nods about the research side of things, so I'll throw it over to you.
I think your question was, where did I get started? How did I get started?
Yeah, more kind of tips for getting published, that sort of side of things, like your experience.
Yeah. So getting published, as I said, I think it's about, yes, it's about doing your research, definitely. Don't, as Dan said, get bogged down by the fact you've had a few rejections. Widen your ambit. There's so many things online as well these days, so many good standard literary magazines, and you can send it out into the world. For example, because I write a lot for India, Australia, Britain, India in particular is a great place to send short stories to. They have an app called the Juggernaut app, for example, which people, they just download a short story. They have short stories on offer. So you buy an individual short story, you download it on a local train, on a crowded bus, you read it, it's for a few rupees. It's a great way to get started. It's owned by HarperCollins, so it's very, very respected. And again, I found, for example, the reason I'm going on about this, get out there, be international, have an international focus, is that HarperCollins India, I was very enthusiastic about my writing my first book of short stories. They loved it. They put it out there in the world. I've been published by them. HarperCollins UK, who read it and loved it, they said, but no, we'd rather wait for your novel because they're not, short stories are not doing so well here. But don't be fazed by that. There is no better or worse in this. HarperCollins India, for example, has a bigger market, more readers than HarperCollins UK. So, don't let yourself be held back by what's previously been perceived as the most prestigious thing to do. Australia as well, great magazines and indie publications. They love short stories. So yeah, just get out there and of course do your research, because there's certain things different countries, different publications, different publishers will want.
That's fabulous. Thanks, Rach. Really good stuff there. Thank you. Giselle, do you have any further to add there?
Yeah, I'm just when you I just say similar to what Dan said, make sure you're 100% really happy with your story before you send it out. But having said that, there's lots of different levels. So obviously you only write the story that you can write at a particular time, and you might write it differently later because you've learned more about writing. So related to that, there's different tiers of journals and places to send out. So perhaps try some of the smaller ones first, because it's really hard to get published in small and big places, but you've got a bit more of a chance in some of the smaller ones. And I think it's good to do a mixture so that you're not discouraged. There's some two really good websites. One's Geotrope, which you can use some of the features without subscribing. I subscribe to it, so you can log all your submissions if you do that. And one's free, called the Submissions Grinder. So they're just places to send things. But I think it's really important to target, as both Shreya and Dan said. I've wasted a lot of time sending stories to places which later weren't suitable. But the other important thing is, if you can, try and buy one of the journals and make sure, especially online, there's often free stories. Try and read some of the stories, because you've got much more chance of being accepted by a place which actually, where you like their writing, they're probably more likely to like your writing. Thanks.
Fabulous. Thank you very much, Giselle. Appreciate that. Yeah, I'll put those websites in the chat in a second for you there, Tracy. Just to pick up on something that's kind of coming through in that discussion there, in terms of the sort of the market for short stories, how would you sort of see that right now? I think kind of I keep there seems to be kind of various kind of doomsayers about where it's at right now, and I think obviously there's quite a lot of positivity coming through. So I'd love to just get your take on what you think the market for short stories is like at the moment, and how it kind of compares to maybe sort of 5, 10, 20 years ago. Shreya, can I throw that one to you?
Yeah, sure. I was just thinking, even as we were all talking, that, the thing is, there is an element of, oh, a short story is a step towards writing a novel. And that isn't the case at all. Read some of the best novelists' short stories. Sometimes the short stories are lesser known, but they are so brilliant, sometimes even better than their novels. Because in a novel, there is that element. You can be a little bit self-indulgent. In a short story, you can't be. You have to land your punches, boom, 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 boom. So, yeah, it's remind me of the question, Alex.
What about the market, really? Kind of how you felt the market was. It a strong market right now? Or, yeah.
Absolutely. So I was going to say, this is age. I was going to say that although short stories are sometimes considered more lightweight, you're less likely to get an award with it, win a Booker or whatever. There is a huge market out there for short story lovers, and because of that, I mean, I think the short story could be brought back as that thing that entertains the reader who doesn't have a lot of time. I mean, the modern world is like that. We don't have a lot of time. We're on the go. Why don't we position, or why don't the publishers position short stories slightly differently, make it a bit like television, sitcoms, in its positioning, I mean. So the bite-sized short story could so easily become a modern staple. I think we just need to go and give our publishers a little bit of a push there.
That's very true. I think no one wants to be the first one to take the chance in a way. Sometimes I think that's something that doesn't come through. Giselle, can I throw that one to you? Anything you'd like to say in terms of the market, the shape of the market right now for short stories?
Yeah, sure. The shape of the market for short stories is much healthier in the USA than in the UK. In the UK, there's loads of great indie journals which are publishing short story collections, but there's lots of waiting times. Sometimes I think they don't have the time to read all the submissions because they're so overwhelmed with submissions. So it's very difficult to get published by small presses, but there are a lot more of them supporting short stories, some really strong small presses at the moment. I think if you want to get your short story collection published by a big publisher with an agent, they always want something longer that follows it. So it's got to be a novel or a memoir or something like that, anything really, as long as it's longer, because it's a hard sell with short stories. So yeah, I think there's a lot of short story markets to send stories to in the USA, but they're quite hard to get into some of the top sort of indie journals. I think Dan got a story won a short story competition called Carve for Carve magazine, which is a really good venue. But yeah, expect more rejections, and also lots of those rejection letters which say the staff really loved it, but you can get those for a long time. So, but by all means, it is possible to break into that market. But yeah, in terms of pay as well, you're likely with some of the bigger journals in America to get paid better. A lot of the journals in the UK, even the really good ones like The Lonely Crowd, Ambit, they don't pay. They pay, or even Dyslexia, little money or nothing sometimes. But it's still quite good to get into them. Yeah, so I'd say there's plenty of places to send short stories to get published. You can put plenty of places to publish short stories, even in the UK, though it gets a bit small sometimes, the UK market. And at the top end, it's really difficult, like sending short stories to Granted. You probably got more luck with an agent most of the time. But in America, there's thousands of markets, so just keep trying. Thanks.
Fabulous. Thank you, Giselle. Dan, any last thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I totally agree with the idea of sending out to markets outside the UK, because there are kind of huge opportunities, and kind of there are areas of the world where the short stories kind of has much more of a prominent position within the kind of the literary world. But that said, I think there's a lot of great things going on in this country too. There's a lot of small presses that are that have been focused very much on short story. You've got Influx has published some great collections. Comma publishes fantastic stuff. Salt's published a huge amount of really great short story writing and collections of authors' work, including mine. Yeah, there's even things like Nightjar. I don't know if people are aware of that, but they publish like short stories, individual chapbooks, so an individual short story in a really beautiful kind of little chapbook to read. So there are lots of opportunities out there, I think, and it is, you know, it's I don't think anybody's necessarily going to get rich writing short stories, possibly. But yeah, but it's interesting that it kind of shifts and changes, and there are lots of really great competitions. I would say that the competitions where you can, and you know, if you can enter, and I know that some of them charge quite a lot of money for entry, and that can be an issue. But they can be really good in kind of raising your profile, and that can be a really good sort of stepping stone then to getting some interest for if you've got a collection ready, for example. Having those things, you know, being able to say that you were shortlisted for a particular prize or something can be really helpful. So there's all those things are kind of going on within the market. I think it's interesting that I read Kurt Vonnegut's letters last year, and in it he kind of talks about the fact he's moaning about the fact that he has to write short stories because the American market was paying so well at the time. He was writing short stories to pay the bills so that he could write his novels, because he didn't get very much money for his novels apparently. So I think it's kind of sometimes it's kind of swings and roundabouts in different markets. Yeah, for that. But yeah, I think there's definitely a lot to be kind of positive about with the short story market.
Sorry, I'm on mute. Yes, I just realised. Thank you, guys. Sorry, just to say, is there anything in terms of that point about competitions that you might want to pick up on, Giselle Schreier, at all to tackle that one a bit further? Any experience? Yeah, Giselle, I'll throw it to you.
I think Dan's right, into competitions, but just be prepared for a lot of not winning, because especially now there's more and more people are entering them, and so there's more and more people, and you have sifters, so it depends who reads them at the first stages to get to the final stage. The judge usually only read the last 20 or 50 or so. It's difficult, but there are smaller competitions. If you can find a smaller competition with less people entering it, by all means, that's sometimes a really good bet. And a bit like submitting to journals, try and submit to a range of competitions. So don't be upset if you don't, get anywhere in the Britport prize, because it's 4,500 short stories that are entered in that prize. But if you go for something with 300 entries, you might have more of a chance. But again, it's also very subjective, down to judges' tastes, and often death by committee, unfortunately. So often like really interesting stories don't get picked, because if there's 12 people deciding, it'll tend to be, obviously something everyone agrees on. So just keep trying, but don't spend too much money on it. And it's good to send to journals as well at the same time. You've probably got more chance of getting into a journal, and in the end, when you show public or agents or publishers your work, potential publishers, they're probably almost just as impressed as being in a particular journal, if it's a good one, than as winning a competition. Although having said that, if you can hit the jackpot and win, the BBC Short Story Prize, or even a finalist, or the Sunday Times Audible, two biggest competitions in the UK, you're probably getting loads of agents ringing you up the next day. Okay.
So thank you very much, Giselle. Shreya, I'll throw it to you, and then I'll pass it to you then afterwards. That's okay. So Shreya, I'll throw it to you next.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I'm very selective about competitions. I don't actually, as a matter of principle, almost join the ones that you have to pay for. Now, this isn't necessarily for everybody. You might want to pay and join a competition. You might be making that big push, but I've always thought, well, I'll wait. I'll keep my eyes open. I'll go for the competitions that aren't asking for money, because of course, when you start out, you don't have that much free cash as a writer. You don't often have that kind of money, and there are enough if you keep your eyes peeled. There are lots of competitions that aren't asking for payment, and they are prestigious ones. And it's good practice whether you win or not. And it builds up your portfolio. And then eventually you'll have 10 or 12 or 13 really good stories that you might even be able to send along to a publisher who, you know, you may never have won a competition. I've been shortlisted more often than not. So, and I haven't joined that many. But when I got together a body of work that a publisher really loved, that was great. And I can now say that I've got 100% publication rate. They're all published. So.
Very few people can say that, Shreya, I would imagine.
It could happen, though. I'm trying to, you know, give hope.
Oh, sorry, Dan, did you have a point to make, or are you okay?
Oh, but yeah, sorry. It was just about the competitions thing again. That point about the smaller competitions. There's some really great kind of local ones, and that's definitely where I started. And with a kind of free to enter and and quite, you know, relatively small, but good enough that you kind of start putting your work out there. And there's some really great local ones. And I'm actually on the judging panel this year for the Leicester Wrights short story prize. So yeah, again, there's lots of really sort of great competitions out there. Particularly support your local ones, the ones that are local to you wherever you are in the country, wherever you are in the world. There'll be somebody somewhere running a short story competition, I would imagine, and they're really good to support.
Brilliant stuff. Giselle, I'll throw that back to you.
I just wanted to add, to what Dan and Shreya just said, is that there's a lot of competitions now that are offering free entries to people who are unwaged or low waged. So it's really worth checking those out early on, because it's usually that 4-month window. Just because sometimes, though, yeah, it can get really expensive, and but there's some really good ones which also ones which cater to different types of writing, like more literary or less literary, etc. Some are more concerned with form. So it's good to, depending on what your work is like, sort of have a few more options. So as I said, look, if you can't afford the entries, that's quite a new thing that most competitions are doing. Thanks.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much, Giselle. I really appreciate that. I'm going to throw one more question out on the panel, then we'll sort of throw out some of the audience questions. I've been scribbling a few that I've seen in the chat as we've gone along. And to tackle something we've just kind of started to touch on there in terms of getting a collection published. So we've kind of talked a lot about journals and competitions. Obviously, for a lot of short story writers, kind of their end game is kind of their own book of their own stories. Any advice for how we might go about that process for those out there who've already maybe got a body of short stories? Shreya, can I kick off with you, and then we'll get to everyone else.
Yes, the advice I was given when I pitched it to HarperCollins, and they said, well, you know, the one thing, even though they are short stories, it'll need to be unified in a book by a theme or a type of story, whether it's, you know, genre or whatever it is. And so bizarrely, and that may not happen again for everybody, but as I sat down and looked at my stories, I saw that there was in fact a kind of thing that linked them all. Obviously, I had to write a ton more as well to make up the book, but I seem to like the twist in the tail, and they love the idea of the twist in the tail because not that many short stories these days do that. And Giselle and I've had these conversations, but anyway, but I felt from reading more modern short stories, which I love, by the way, that I felt a bit of nostalgia for the past, where you had the Roald Dahls and the M.R. Jameses and that kind of twist in the tail, O. Henry. And so basically what you're looking for when you're trying to put together a collection is something, well, a USP, a unique selling proposition. What are you doing that's different? Maybe you're trying to bring back the twist in the tail. Maybe you're doing something else that's really different. You're talking about a particular subject that doesn't get talked enough about, or you're writing about something that really is universal, and you can send it out to any publisher in the world. So go for, so it's a kind of combination of the universal. Make your short stories universal. Make them also very particular in terms of what you yourself can bring to it that nobody else can. And thirdly, of course, the theme. Make sure they're connected in some ways. Once you have that, send out your best 3 or 4 to your publisher, to a number of publishers, if you don't have one you're working with already, and give it a shot, because there are lots of publishers out there who love short stories.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much, Shreya. Dan, can I throw that one to you next?
Yeah, I think Shreya's point about making sure that your collection kind of hangs together well as a group of stories, I think that's absolutely key, because it makes it easier for you to talk about what the book, what the collection as a whole is doing when you're approaching publishers, and you can say, well, this is the type of work this is. It makes it easier for you to target who you would like, to publish it as well, because you know who to send it to, because you've got a good idea of what the collection as a whole is doing. Um, I would say as well, don't be afraid to remove stories that don't fit. Um, my collection originally should have included a different story, which I took out at quite late, at a relatively late stage in the sort of the publication process, because I realised that it didn't quite sit well with the rest of the collection, and I was a little reticent to remove it because it was a story that I really liked, but I realised that actually the book is better without it, because it kind of it didn't sit well within those other stories. The benefit of that process is that then it gives you another story to then, okay, well, this is I like what this story's doing. Maybe I could write a collection that's doing some things along the same lines, or doing other things that tie in with this one. So that, you can see it as an opportunity, I suppose, with that as well. And I think yeah, kind of giving it a good bit of thought about how the stories fit together in terms of order. I spent ages kind of I put post-it notes on my kitchen cupboards, and with a story order in it, and would then go away and read the stories. And then while I was making a cup of coffee or whatever, I could look at the story list and kind of move it around and think, well, that one doesn't quite work so well there. So having a kind of running order, think of it like almost like an album. You've got your tracks, and certain ones will fit together better, or they'll build a kind of cumulative effect as the reader goes through the collection. So give that a bit of thought as well, I would say.
That's excellent. Thank you very much. And Giselle, anything further to add there?
Yeah, I think just make sure, don't rush it. So make sure that you've, written enough stories that you think are really strong. I mean, collections tend to be uneven, so they don't all have to be the best story you've ever written, but it really helps. And also, one other thing I find that really helps is trying to write a short, sort of like a short description of each story, because sometimes, and a really good cover letter. So if when I was trying to find themes for a collection, which I haven't had published yet, but I sort of did, sometimes I just write out as if I were describing it to someone else and try and explain what it's about. And that helps you to sort of get some idea about which stories to include. So yeah, and sometimes you've got multiple possible themes or stories, like you might have the environment or society or something like that, but it's just finding the strongest one. In terms of order, yeah, like Dan, what a nightmare. Again, it's that shuffle. I also made some little cards, which a tip I got out of a book, and shuffled them. And then one day I just thought it clicked into place. Thought that's it. And then about a year later, I changed it. So really difficult. But if you do get an agent, which is quite difficult for short story collections, because they don't make as much money, but if you're lucky enough to get one, they'll help you order the story as well. So you usually send in your strongest, as Shreya said, 3 or 4. Great.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Giselle. Shreya, I'm going to throw that to you. Then I'm going to throw it to some audience questions. So I'll let you pop in here, and then we'll move it.
Yeah, sure. I just wanted to just get back to what I was saying about an unifying theme, which we all mentioned. But within your unifying theme, you also have to show variety. So go for a lot of variety in terms of characters, settings, subjects, even while you do have that theme that runs through it. Yeah, so that's essential. And the run order actually helps with that. So if you get your run order right, it's a great way to show that whole spectrum of things that you can do with the short story, your skills with your short story. The run order in the right places, the stories in the right places are great for exhibiting just that.
That's excellent. Thank you very much, Shreya. Really appreciate that. And thanks so much for all the insight there on the panel so far. So I'm going to throw some audience questions. I've been scribbling these down in the chat as they've gone by. So I'll sort of work from sort of first ask to last ask, basically, as we've gone through. Question from Glyn a little bit earlier on. What's the difference between novels and short stories in terms of planning? Giselle, would you mind maybe kicking us off on that one? Any thoughts there?
Short stories, as I said, I mean, depends on your style. I certainly don't believe in planning short stories because I think it can kill the life in them. So that's how I write. I find out what on earth is going on as I go. So I'd say no planning necessary for me anyway. But some people would prefer to start with planning and go the other way. Novels, yes. Well, I haven't written one. I did write a 2,000-word novel, which was just a joke. I thought I'll write a novel, and then after 2,000 words, I thought this is a short story. Yeah, completely different form. A novel is obviously more expensive, and you can often spot novelists who write short stories. Sometimes they haven't written them before, and they're not short stories quite there because you have to be much tighter with the. So, but to get back to the planning, yes, I think even if it's just rough planning, like I'm roughly writing, something along. I think you can start off just writing whatever, but yeah, I think you'll have to do a bit more planning and for a novel, definitely.
Great stuff. Shreya, Dan, anything further to add there? Feel free to jump in.
Yeah. Sorry, Dan, did you want to go? I'll go. So, I mean, the great thing is that Giselle thinks completely differently about structuring, and that's great because then you have the benefit of both our experience in this. I personally believe that there should be a skeleton of a plan. It shouldn't be a plan that ties you in. You can step outside of it, you can play with it. It's a skeleton, it's a very thin thing, and you're fleshing it out. But as with novels, and the same thing with short stories, you plan differently, but you still do plan because you're working towards something. Now, whether that comes from my discipline as a journalist, because that's how I started life, I don't know, but I find it worked for everything from poetry to the opera to short stories to novels. It's a good idea to have a bit of a structure to start with. It just crystallizes your ideas.
Wonderful. Thank you, Shreya. Dan, anything further to add there on that question?
Yeah, I actually, I'm like Giselle. I'll start with an idea, and it might be something as simple as, kind of one story that I wrote just started with this idea of a damp patch growing in a wall, and that was all I had, and I figure out what the story's going to be. I just keep writing, and things sort of happen. There's a brilliant book by Ron Carver called Ron Carver Writes a Story, and it's about his short story, The Debutante's Ball, and what he does is he takes you through every stage of his writing of the first draft of that story. So he's kind of kept notes and he talks you through each stage of it. And for me, finding the structure of the story, my planning is kind of my first draft is kind of a planning exercise. I'm writing the short story and working out what the next sentence is, where the story's going. And Ron Carver talks about that sort of process in his book and talks about the fact that writing a short story is a kind of a voyage of discovery, and you find out where you are going by going there. So I'm very much kind of on the side, kind of a writer like Giselle, where I'm kind of writing with that in mind, where I'm figuring out the story as I go. But once there, what I find I've got is actually, okay, this is the structure that this is the plan almost that I might have had, although it's a bit more fleshed out, that I might have had if I'd have planned beforehand. So I don't think the two techniques are actually that different. And certainly my research with pre-closure and using that kind of pre-closure staging to structure stories kind of bears that out, that it's just a different process for the planning. The first draft is kind of like the planning, and I'm figuring out what the story is going to be, and then it's kind of, okay, so how do I restructure that to be better at doing that thing it's trying to do. So I'd kind of think, I think it's maybe even a mistake to think of the two separate things, and I've certainly not just solely written sort of straight off. I have planned. There have been stories that I've planned as well. And I think it depends on the story sometimes as to how you want to approach it.
Thank you very much, Dan. Giselle, I'll throw it on back to you. See your hand up there.
Sure. Yeah, I just want to say there's an excellent book about writing by Ray Bradbury. I think it's called The Zen of Writing, and it's a similar thing, interesting thing to what Dan was saying, because it's quite hard to explain when you're teaching writing how you start a story. But he does it beautifully in there, because it's often two things. Like sometimes I don't know, you've written and written and written. Well, I do lots of free writing and something, and it's not quite there. And then one day something else happens, and sometimes it's completely random. Like once I just went for a ride on my bike and saw a bird in the forest, and then the bird became the central symbol of the story. So it's I think it's just that spontaneity that's important, especially for someone like me who's quite analytical. So, and I cannot be analytical in the initial stages. But yes, like Dan said in Shrey, I mean, structure definitely has to come into it, but it's just how you work to find it. And different people probably do it differently depending on what kind of people they are and how you think and so on.
I'll throw that one back to you quickly, Dan. So I want to get on to a couple more questions as well. So I'll throw that one back to you and we'll move on.
Yeah, it's just that something that Giselle said kind of ties into in Ron Carver's book. He talks about the fact there's one point in the story where the main character goes into a bar and he didn't know what was going to happen next, and he just typed the next sentence, which was there's a woman dancing on the table. And the next part of his book is just him literally like, there's a woman on the table. Why is there a woman on the table? And he's trying to, he's describing that moment in the writing of something just appearing in the story. And that's that spontaneity that Giselle's talking about. And I think that's really key for when you're writing short fiction, that if you do allow yourself that kind of freedom, even if you've got a plan, you're as you write, you're going to deviate from it. And don't be afraid if something creeps into the story that you're kind of like, I don't know why that's there yet. Just kind of go with it. Be comfortable with kind of the unknown and the spontaneous within the story, and let it kind of play out. And the story will, your subconscious or whatever is telling you to put something in. Kind of go with it and see what happens.
Well, excellent stuff. Thank you very much. Oh, Shreya, can we move on to the next question? Sorry, I'm trying to get as many in as I can. Sorry, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Sorry, I've got a few left to go. Question from Lloyd. Ask about whether it's the best bet to find a publication and kind of write something particularly aimed at it, or to write the story first and then find a home for it. Dan, do you have any thoughts? You took a big sigh there, so I'm going to throw that one to you first.
Yeah, I sighed because I went down that route when I first started, and I would advise against it. For me personally, I kind of ended up writing stories that I thought people would like, rather than writing stories that I needed to write or that I enjoyed. Because I figured everybody who gets into who wants to write, they generally want to write because they read a lot, and they read a lot of good stuff. So you're kind of wanting, what you're trying to do is write the stories that that aren't out there, that only you can write. And I think the only way to do that is just to write, kind of write about the things that interest you, even if you don't know why they interest you, and then find the market. For me, that's the way I go. Is kind of I write something now, and it will be as long as it needs to be complete, and then I'll try and figure out, okay, where can I send that? Where can that go? Where does it fit in? Right. If you try and do it the other way around, I think you're trying to please some nebulous kind of amorphous kind of ideal reader that doesn't exist. And I don't know, for me that just doesn't end up producing good stories, certainly for me.
Shreya, can I throw that one to you?
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with Dan there that you need to write the story you want to write, and only then consider the magazines and the journals and the publishers you're sending them out to, because there's so many. Somebody or the other somewhere, as long as you've got a good story, it will find a home, rather than doing it the other way around, where you found a journal, you really want to be in it, and you write a story that you think they will like. It doesn't always work out that way anyway. So yes, write your story first. Tell the story you want to tell, whether you have even whether you have a structure in it or not, whether you're spontaneous. I personally think a mix of the two works best for me. You can even write from back to front, but yeah, don't write to you. The short story does give you a few parameters anyway. You do need to have it within a certain number of words. There are themes that people want you to write about to some extent, or pressing themes in the world outside you really want to write about. But yes, write for yourself, entertain yourself first, make it the story you want to tell.
Thank you, Shreya. Any final points there, Giselle? No, just completely agree with both speakers. Yeah, don't. It's just all ends in tears if you try, unless you sort of write in like full say for Warhammer stories, some professional writers who write sort of those, they have to write to a certain thing, but yeah, it just doesn't work. And you might want to be one type of writer, but it's just like drawing or painting or something. You start with one idea, but you end up being whatever writer you are. So you can't really, and you can't help that. So if you end up sort of, being perhaps in a genre you don't, it's not as well paying or whatever, it's not going to work. And so just do it. I think enjoy yourself is the most important thing. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, everyone. I'm going to throw this one out next. It's come up a couple of times from both Martin and Lynn. Optimum word count, best length for short stories. Man, there may not be an absolute best, but I suppose like maybe if we're thinking about a ballpark or how many words we'd roughly be looking at. Shreya, can I throw that to you?
Yeah, this is for the advice from my publishers and not just HarperCollins, but Five Leaves and so on. Everyone's I've published for said that a good short story, and I'm sure this is not the ultimate on it, but a good short story should be within 5,000 words. Now, whether that's true or not, but it helps me because I like writing. I write in short bursts, and I like completing things pretty much, at least put down that first draft and so on in that first burst. And so it helps me to keep it nice and compact. And I think it's good for the reader. As we've said, people don't read as much these days. So crisp and concise and precise. But at the same time, that doesn't stop you from playing with form and subject and being spontaneous and just, writing a really good short story.
Fabulous. Thank you very much. Giselle, any advance on that at all? Any further?
I think anything above 750 becomes more of a story, but I have written shorter pieces as flash fiction. I think the story has to find its own length, but I think, and I've noticed my short stories, a lot of them were shorter, now they're getting longer, but one of my sort of successful stories was about 1,500 words. So I think for me, a short story will naturally probably usually be actuated under 5,000. Some you can get a longer form between 7,000 and 11,000 as well. But there'll be different types of stories depending on their length as well. And the really short form, sometimes you can do something really powerful that you couldn't sustain over a longer, say 4,000 words. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Giselle. Dan, any final thoughts there?
Yeah, I think I agree with a lot of what Shreya and Giselle are saying. That I think a short story, essentially, the story, I think you need to think of each one separately and just how long does this one need to be. I've written stories that are like 100 words long. I've written stories, one of the ones in my latest collection is 14,000, so it's bordering on a novella. So I think it just depends on what the story needs as to how long it needs to be. Kurt Vonnegut actually again gives some really good advice on this regarding writing short stories, and essentially he just tells you to not waste the reader's time. So just look out for moments where you're kind of the wheels are spinning in the story, but nothing really is changing or nothing is moving forward. I think generally the shorter you can make any given story, it will be better. Generally speaking, that's not always the case, but generally speaking, shorter is usually better with the short story. But the story will need to be as long as it needs to be.
Excellent. Thank you very much, everyone. I don't think we're quite going to have time to get everyone's questions in before 1 o'clock. I've got one final question I'll ask from Catherine. Are you better to work towards publishing in journals or to look at publishing a collection? What would your advice be there, folks? Giselle, can I throw that one to you first?
If you get stories published in journals and when you submit them to a publisher, they've far more likely to consider publishing it. Really important actually to have some publications, and maybe at least half of the short story, I reckon. So.
Thank you. Dan, Shreya, any further takes there?
Yeah, no, I was just going to agree that it's like a stepping stone to getting that collection of your. Not many publishers will consider, especially the big ones, a collection if you've not got a bit of a track record already of publishing in journals and a few short listings here or there. So, but that shouldn't stop you from keep putting your collection together, even as you keep sending them out. They're kind of the same anyway. They're symbiotic. They could be the same stories that you're sending out there, seeing how they're received. If they're well received, so much more likely to land up in a collection eventually.
Excellent stuff. And any final thoughts on that one?
Yeah, just agree with both. It is that case of the journals, the competitions are kind of a stepping stone, and as you say, they're kind of a good test of whether the stories are kind of landing with readers initially, and they really will help you get your collection published wherever that might be.
Brilliant stuff. Thank you very much. We're rattling through. I'm going to try and squeeze one more in, if I may. Question from Helena. Any advice on approaching the agent in terms of trying to get a short story collection published? Any thoughts on how we might go about that? Shreya, I know it's something you've had some experience with, so I'll start with you there, if that's all right.
I actually haven't. I don't have an agent. I'm my own agent. And each thing has led to another. So I already had a publishing contract with HarperCollins, who published my sort of memoir meets journalism book. And that's when I popped the question about the short stories. And they said yes, which was brilliant. So I'm not sure how it works if you're approaching an agent with just short stories. I would also encourage you to send things out. They're open submission calls, you know, big publishers, small publishers, everyone does them. So by all means, look for an agent. But I believe I'm living proof that you can actually build a little bit of a career just completely on your own, and you don't need an agent.
Thank you, Shreya. Dan, any thoughts there at all? Throw that one to you.
Yeah, I think it's a struggle to get agents interested in short story collections. I think on the whole, I think a lot of certainly the smaller publishers that are really committed to the short story, they're very open to submissions from unagented writers. So yeah, I think it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, that whole thing with the short stories don't sell, therefore agents don't take them on, therefore publishers don't publish them, therefore short stories don't sell. I think actually, as Shreya pointed out at the beginning of this session, if somebody actually took a chance on it and positioned them in the market in a particular way, I think they could be massive.
Thank you very much, Dan. Giselle, anything else to add there?
Yeah, just that they are quite few and far between agents interested in short stories, but they do exist, and I think it's worth approaching them sometimes, just especially if you're able to write something longer, because as I said, they often consider those two things together. So yeah, thanks.
That's great. Thank you very much, Giselle. So I've got a couple of minutes left. I'm going to ask you one final question, which I had on my list of questions when I started. We mentioned earlier on, check out the good short story writers. Check out great short stories from the present and the past. I'm going to ask you all to try and pin down a couple of short story writers you'd really suggest our audience checking out, send them away with a reading list. Dan, would you mind kicking us off with your favourites, your suggestions?
Yeah, I'm going to say three. William Gay, American writer. I still don't know how he does the amazing things he does in his short stories, and I keep going back to them. Absolutely brilliant. I don't think I've read anybody better, to be fair. Amy Hempel will teach you how to write short stories, and she will break your heart while she's doing it. And I'm just reading at the moment Steve Pemberton and Reece Shearsmith's scripts for Inside Number 9. And they're television scripts, but they are the most fantastically well-structured, brilliant short stories. So I'd recommend reading those. They're teaching me a lot currently.
That's fabulous. Thank you, Dan. Shreya, your recommendations there?
Yeah, I would, especially to learn the craft and to enjoy yourself while you're doing it, I would suggest go back to the classic masters of the twist in the tale, even those who are not, Dubliners, James Joyce, D.H. Lawrence, and like I said earlier, Edgar Allan Poe and Saki. And then, just one last point, you know, as I said, pitch internationally, but also read internationally. Try Tagore. He was Nobel laureate, the first who wasn't from the Western world for literature, Nobel laureate for literature. And his short stories are gems. They're really worth reading. So find a good translation and go out there and try Tagore.
Fabulous. And Giselle, I'll throw that one to you last of all.
Sure. Yeah, I wrote down a long list before, but George Saunders is one of my favorite short story writers, and he's published a book about Russian short story writers, including Gogol's The Nose, which is a brilliant story, called A Swim in the Pond in the Rain, and he goes through the craft. So I recommend his books and that book. Deborah Levy, Black Vodka, love that. William Trevor, Irish short story writer. Leonie Ross, Come Let Us Sing Anyway, one of my favorite top short story collections, absolutely brilliant brilliant, vibrant, sort of rich writer. Joyce Carol Oates, read any short story she writes. She's astonishing. And Adam Merrick and Kelly Link, they write slightly fantastical stories, which I absolutely love. But there's a book from 2020, The Big Book of Modern Fantasy by Jeff and Anne van der Meer. When people think of fantasy, they often think of dragons or something, but like that's one of the most amazing fantastical sort of crossover literary anthologies, and it's got such a range of writers, including writers that people wouldn't necessarily consider fantastical writers. I could go on, but I'll stop there.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm going to say we're going to draw things to a close. I want to say thank you so much to Giselle, Shreya and Dan for all their fantastic points throughout the session. Really, really interesting stuff. I've got lots of reading to go away and do. I'm sure you all have as well. Thank you so much for all their input today. And hopefully we'll see many of you back for the next session here at the Writers' Conference. A big virtual round of applause for Shreya, Dan and Giselle. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone for
Brian.
listening.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.